Time now for the Great British Debate this out, and I'm asking, do we need a new definition of Islamism? The Community Secretary has warned, that's Michael Gove, that pro-Palestine protesters that should be marching alongside, they could be marching alongside extremists. Michael Gove's intervention, again, comes ahead of the announcement of a new definition for extremism. We're getting ourselves in knots, I reckon, and that came out this week. Now, it's hoped that officially defining the term will ensure that governments cut ties with anybody whose behaviour crosses that line. But will the announcement go far enough? And what about Islamism? Doesn't that need defining too? So for the Great British Debate this out, I'm asking, do we need a new definition of Islamism? Right, so joining me now is senior political commentator Nigel Nelson, Reform Party's deputy leader Ben Habib. Sunil Sharma is also joining me as well. See, that's why I say name, title. Name, title. Right. So you guys, Sunil Sharma, I'll start with you. So Islamism, we're getting... he's talking about a new definition. Do we need one?
I don't think so. I think with both Islamism and extremism, I think we have to be very wary of these definitions and how much impact it can have in society. We don't want to be running the risk of turning a free-thinking democracy into a tyrannic-run state. So I think these new definitions, I think a lot of them serve their purpose quite well as it is, and I'm not sure if we should be asking the state, the government, to have even greater intervention into society. I mean, I think in order to think, you have to have the risk of being offensive, and when you're seeking the truth, it's the same thing. You have to have the risk of being offensive. Otherwise, we'll never find the truth, and we'll all be sitting here being told how we should think and what we should say, and I think that's a very slippery slope and dangerous way to go.
OK, so what do you think, Ben Habib?
Well, I very largely agree with what Sunil said. I don't think that we need a new definition. We've got, you know, the way British law works is that, does it make sense to the, common man on the Clapham omnibus? And we know what extremism is when we see it. We don't need to define it for the purposes of the law. We need less state intervention. But what we do also need to recognise is that if we're going to have immigration, and we've had far too much immigration in the last 25 years, more people have come to this country in the last 25 years than in all of history before that. But if we are going to have immigration, then we've got to have a melding of the people who come into the country into one settled social construct. And there should be debate about there should be debate amongst all of us very openly about our relative values and how we see life and so on. But that can only happen if you do have a settled social construct. It can't happen if everyone operates in separate silos and it becomes verboten to challenge any one of those silos sets of beliefs. And that's where we are as a country at the moment. And we are becoming increasingly divided. And as I mentioned earlier on in the programme, Nana, diversity, equality and inclusion doesn't serve to generate diversity, equality or inclusion. It's division, inequality and exclusion. That's what we're practising at the moment, and we've got to reverse dramatically from where we're heading culturally as a country.
OK, Nigel Nelson.
Well, I mean, the first thing there is Islamism. I think we've got a definition of Islamism, which means political action guided by the Islamic religion. People get the two confused, Islamic and Islamism. Then you come to whether or not Michael Gove needs a new definition of extremism, and the existing one seems to work perfectly well, which is not undermining fundamental British values, and they're defined as democracy, rule of law, liberty and respect for other people's religions. So we'll obviously have to see what Michael Gove comes up with, but it seems to me it's dangerous to start tightening up because he'll catch other groups in the middle of this, which he doesn't need to. So people who are transgender critical could be affected. People who have a religious belief that gay sex is a sin could be affected. And suddenly we're actually undermining free speech, which shouldn't be the intention.
But, when you hear all of this as well, because for me, when I hear all of this, I think that they use it almost as an excuse for their inaction. So they use it as an excuse for the fact that they haven't used what they currently can within the laws, and the definition of Islamism and extremism that is already within the law and they could properly police, but they don't do it. So then they sort of make it look like they're being useful. Just kind of, we'll move around the edges and then...
It's performative legislation to satisfy the electorate when actually they're doing nothing substantive. As, you know, for example, when we saw people urinating on British war memorials, the police said they couldn't stop it. Well, actually, they can. There are already laws in place to stop it. We've got to stop legislating. We've got to start enforcing the law as it stands.
Sunil?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think what we've got to start to do is we have an amazing police force that's not being, I don't think, utilised to its max capacity remotely. Instead of Michael Gove focusing on these new laws, I'd much rather him give police the power and the courage and the strength to actually go arrest the people, like Ben has mentioned. The reality is they won't do that now. We're seeing these courses where the police now go on these understanding diversity, inclusion. I'd much rather them have the courage and be given the responsibility to be actually take action on these things. And I think it's deeply concerning whenever the state get involved in terms of when we're talking about laws, when we're talking about definitions. And I completely agree with Nigel's point, although I think Michael's talking about this in particular with some of the Palestine marches and how, you know, some of the words that they're using can be seen as very offensive to the Jewish community. Whilst I may agree with that personally, in terms of the reason he's doing this, we run the risk of this becoming a police state in general, and it could transpire more than just these pro-Palestinian marches. And it may be, like Nigel said, about the trans issues, about diversity issues, and I think that's a really, really concerning state.
Because these things do tend to get caught up in it, don't they? And then suddenly it legitimises something that isn't right, and we saw that. I mean, I always give the example of the Isla Bryson case, where the definition of woman was changed in the dictionary to include people who identify as women, which is, you know, on the surface of it, it feels that that's fair enough, but with what limits, or what, you know, what checks and balances have you got to make sure that person is actually that thing? And then suddenly they are now within the law of being a woman, then they can suddenly say, well, I want to go to a female jail even though I'm a man because I'm a woman. And I hear it. So do you think then, Nigel Nelson, do we need new definitions for anything? Extremism, Islamism, do we really need these new definitions?
Well, we need definitions when the ones we've got aren't working.
Do you think...
And so, for instance, there's no settled definition of Islamophobia. We probably need to actually relook at that so the political parties can agree on what it means. But you're absolutely right, Nana. The trouble about doing these things is they create unintended consequences. You gave a good example there. And that's the danger of tinkering around with something that Ben said we all understand anyway.
Exactly. Ben Habib, do you think we need a new definition?
No, we shouldn't have a new definition. We shouldn't define Islamophobia either. I mean, it's to suggest that having a concern about a particular ideology is somehow an irrational fear would be to shut down debate. What we want is debate. If there are elements in our society...
OK, I'm going to have to stop you there.
Yeah, OK, I could go on.
It was really good, and I know you can go on. Sunil Sharma, you've got about 10 seconds.
I definitely agree with Ben. Being concerned about Islamic extremism does not equal Islamophobia.
So yes or no? Do we need a new definition, yes or no?
No.
Ben Habib, yes or no?
No.
Nigel Nelson, yes or no?
No.
Wow. It's a clean sweep. What do you think? Perhaps you think we do. GBViews@gbnews.com. Thank you so much to Nigel Nelson. Also Ben Habib and Sunil Sharma. Thank you so much.